The lantern's flame flickered in the window of the small ranch house every single night without fail, a golden beacon against the vast darkness of the Montana Territory, and Sarah Webb stood on the train platform in St. Louis with her carpetbag clutched in trembling hands, wondering if she possessed the courage to follow that light back to the man who had been lighting it for her these past 3 years. The year was 1878, and Sarah had been running from her heart since the summer of 1875 when she had left Jake Sullivan standing in the dusty street of Redemption, Montana. His eyes filled with a pain that still haunted her dreams. She had been 20 years old then, barely more than a girl, terrified of the vast emptiness of the frontier, and convinced she needed the civilization of the East to become the woman she was meant to be. Jake had been 23, a cowboy with calloused hands and a gentle soul who had loved her with an intensity that had both thrilled and frightened her. Now Sarah was 23 herself, old enough to recognize the terrible mistake she had made in leaving, old enough to understand that civilization meant nothing without love, and old enough to know that Jake Sullivan was the only man who would ever make her heart beat the way it did when she thought of his crooked smile, and the way he said her name like it was a prayer. Her sister Martha had written to her just last week with news from Redemption. The letter sat folded in Sarah's pocket, the words burned into her memory. "That cowboy of yours still lights a lantern every night and sets it in his window. Everyone in town knows he is waiting for you. The light can be seen from miles away. People say it is the brightest thing in the whole valley." Sarah bought her ticket heading west with hands that shook so badly the clerk asked if she was ill. She was not ill. She was terrified and hopeful and desperate all at once. The journey would take weeks, first by train to the end of the line, then by stagecoach through treacherous mountain passes and across rivers swollen with spring snowmelt. She had saved every penny from her work as a seamstress in St. Louis, living in a cramped boarding house where the walls were thin and the future seemed even thinner. The train lurched forward, and Sarah pressed her face to the window, watching the city disappear behind her. Her mother had died 2 years ago, the very reason she had fled to St. Louis in the first place. Her father had passed when she was 16, and her mother had been so fragile, so dependent, that Sarah had felt obligated to take her east to live with her aunt. But her mother had never adapted to city life. She had withered like a prairie flower transplanted to a dark room, and Sarah had watched helplessly as the light faded from her eyes. After the funeral, Sarah had stayed in St. Louis because she had not known what else to do. She had convinced herself that Jake would have moved on, that 3 years was too long to wait, that her leaving had killed whatever love he had felt for her. But Martha's letters had told a different story. Jake had built up his ranch, working himself nearly to death, but every single night without exception, he lit that lantern and placed it in the window facing the road that led to town. The train carried her west through Illinois and Iowa, through Nebraska where the prairie stretched endless and golden under the spring sun. Sarah stared out at the familiar landscape and felt something inside her chest begin to loosen, some knot she had been carrying for 3 years finally starting to unwind. She shared her compartment with a preacher's wife heading to a mission in Wyoming and a young couple moving west to start a cattle ranch in Colorado. The young wife was probably 19, her husband barely older, and they held hands constantly, whispering to each other and laughing at private jokes. Sarah felt a sharp pang of envy watching them. That could have been her and Jake. They could have had 3 years together already. They could have built a life, maybe even started a family. Instead, she had wasted 3 years in a city that had never felt like home, sleeping alone in a narrow bed, dreaming of wide skies and a man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. The train finally reached its terminus in a rough frontier town called Benson's Crossing. Sarah climbed down onto the platform with legs stiff from days of travel. The air smelled different here, cleaner somehow, carrying the scent of pine and sage and possibility. She found the stagecoach office and learned that the next coach heading north toward Montana would not leave for 3 days. 3 days felt like an eternity, but Sarah had waited 3 years. She could manage 3 more days. She took a room at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Callahan, a brisk woman with kind eyes who asked no questions but seemed to see everything. Sarah spent the days walking the streets of Benson's Crossing, watching cowboys and miners and frontier families go about their business. She bought supplies for the journey: a warmer shawl, sturdy boots, dried meat, and hardtack. She also went to the general store and bought fabric, beautiful blue calico that reminded her of Montana skies. On the 3rd evening, Mrs. Callahan invited Sarah to take supper with her in her private quarters. They ate beef stew and fresh bread, and over coffee, the widow finally asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "You running from something or toward something, dear?" Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug and smiled. "Toward something, toward someone. A man, a cowboy. I left him 3 years ago, and he has been lighting a lantern for me every night since, waiting for me to come home." Mrs. Callahan's eyes grew soft. "That is a man who loves you true. My husband was like that. When he courted me, he rode 20 miles every Sunday just to sit in my father's parlor for an hour. Some men love with their whole hearts, and those are the ones worth having." "I was so stupid to leave," Sarah whispered. "I was scared and young, and I did not understand what I was giving up." "But you understand now," Mrs. Callahan said firmly, "and you are going back. That takes more courage than staying away. You are going to have to face him, face what you did, and hope he can forgive you. What if he has changed his mind? What if the lantern is just habit now, not hope? Then you will know you tried. But something tells me that Cowboy is going to take one look at you and forget every moment of pain you caused him. That is what love does. It forgives." The stagecoach left at dawn. Sarah climbed aboard with 5 other passengers: a salesman, 2 miners, a woman traveling to meet her sister, and a young Army lieutenant being reassigned to Fort Benton. The coach was cramped and uncomfortable, and the road was rutted and rough. They traveled through mountains where snow still clung to the highest peaks, forded rivers that ran cold and fast, and stopped at way stations where the food was terrible and the beds were worse. Sarah barely noticed the discomfort. Her mind was focused entirely on what lay ahead. She rehearsed what she would say to Jake 1,000 different ways. Sometimes she imagined running into his arms. Sometimes she imagined him turning away from her. Sometimes she imagined arriving to find the house dark, the lantern finally extinguished, Jake gone or married to someone else. On the 5th day of stagecoach travel, they reached the town of Cedar Falls, just 40 miles south of Redemption. Sarah's heart began to pound so hard she thought everyone in the coach must be able to hear it. The coach would continue north in the morning, making its final stops before turning back south. Sarah would reach Redemption by late afternoon tomorrow. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed at the way station and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows dance in the lamplight. Somewhere 40 miles north, Jake was lighting his lantern. Was he thinking of her? Did he still remember exactly what she looked like, or had her face become a faded memory? She had changed in 3 years. She was thinner, her face more angular, her eyes holding a sadness that had not been there before. Would he still want her? The morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah dressed with shaking hands, putting on her best dress, the deep green one that Jake had always said brought out the color of her eyes. She braided her dark hair and pinned it up, then covered it with her bonnet. When she looked at herself in the small, spotted mirror, she saw a woman, not the frightened girl who had left Montana 3 years ago. The stagecoach rolled north through country Sarah remembered like she remembered her own heartbeat. There were the Black Bluff Mountains to the west, their peaks still snow-covered. There was Stony Creek, running high with snowmelt. There was the old lightning-struck pine that marked the southern boundary of the valley where Redemption nestled against the foothills. Every landmark made her heart beat faster. The coach pulled into Redemption at 4 in the afternoon. The town had grown in 3 years. There were new buildings along Main Street, a new hotel, a new saloon. But the church was the same, and the general store, and the little schoolhouse where Sarah had once taught reading to the ranchers' children. The driver called out their arrival, and Sarah climbed down on trembling legs. Main Street was busy with afternoon traffic. Cowboys rode past, tipping their hats. Women with shopping baskets hurried along the wooden sidewalks. A dog barked somewhere nearby. And everyone, absolutely everyone, turned to stare at Sarah as she stood beside the stagecoach with her carpetbag at her feet. She recognized faces. Mrs. Henderson from the general store. Tom Baker, who ran the livery, the Reverend Clark and his wife. And then Martha was running toward her, her sister's face bright with joy and shock. Martha caught her in a fierce embrace, nearly knocking her over. "You came? Oh, Sarah, you actually came. When did you decide? Why did you not write and tell me?" Martha was laughing and crying at the same time. "I only decided 2 weeks ago," Sarah said, her own voice shaking. "I got your letter about the lantern and I just knew I had to come home. I had to see if he would still have me." Martha pulled back and gripped Sarah's shoulders hard. "He has not looked at another woman in 3 years, not once. Everyone in this town has tried to match him up with someone, but he just smiles and says he is already spoken for. Sarah, he has been waiting for you like you were coming back tomorrow. Every single day he has been waiting." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "I need to see him. I need to go to him right now. His ranch is 5 miles north. You can see it from the edge of town. When it gets dark, you will see the lantern. It is always the first light that appears in the valley." Martha squeezed her hands. "Do you want me to come with you, or do you want to go alone?" "I need to go alone," Sarah said, "but I need a horse. Tom Baker will rent you one, come on." Martha took her to the livery, talking the whole way about what had happened in Redemption over the past 3 years. Martha herself had married a rancher named David Cooper, and they had a baby daughter. Sarah's old friend Emma had moved to California. The Johnsons had sold their ranch and returned east. But Jake had stayed. Jake had built up his herd, improved his land, hired 2 ranch hands and lit his lantern every single night without fail. Tom Baker was happy to rent Sarah a gentle mare. He was a gruff man in his 50s, but his eyes were kind as he helped her into the saddle. "That cowboy is going to think he is seeing a ghost when you ride up to his door." "He is a good man, Miss Sarah. You did right to come back." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned the mare north and urged her into a trot. The road leading out of Redemption was the same road she had traveled south on 3 years ago, crying so hard she could barely see. Now she rode north with her heart in her throat and hope burning in her chest like a flame. The valley opened up before her, wide and beautiful, ringed by mountains and carpeted in spring grass. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. A hawk circled overhead. And there, about 3 miles ahead, Sarah could see a cluster of buildings that had to be Jake's ranch. Even from this distance, she could see that he had built a barn and a bunkhouse. The main house was larger than she remembered, freshly painted white with a covered porch. Sarah slowed the mare to a walk as she approached, suddenly terrified. What if she was wrong? What if he did not want her anymore? What if the years had changed him, made him bitter? She nearly turned around twice, but each time she forced herself to keep going. She had not come all this way to lose her courage now. The sun was sinking toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Sarah rode through the open gate, her eyes searching for any sign of Jake. She saw two ranch hands working near the barn. They looked up, saw her, and one of them immediately started running toward the house. Sarah dismounted in front of the porch, her legs barely supporting her weight. The front door was closed, but she could see curtains in the windows. The house looked well cared for, loved. This was a home, not just a place to sleep. The door opened. Jake Sullivan stepped out onto the porch, and Sarah's heart stopped beating entirely for one long, impossible moment. He looked older, his face more lined, his shoulders broader. He wore faded denim and a worn shirt, his dark hair curling slightly at his collar. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, were exactly the same, and they were staring at her like she was a vision, like she was something holy and impossible. "Sarah." His voice was rough, disbelieving. "Hello, Jake," she whispered. He came down the porch steps slowly, like he was afraid she would vanish if he moved too quickly. He stopped a few feet away from her, his hands clenched at his sides. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the deeper tan of his skin, the way his jaw was tight with emotion. "Is it really you?" he asked, his voice breaking on the last word. "It is really me," Sarah said. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she did not wipe them away. "I followed your light home, Jake. I saw your lantern and I came home." Something broke in his expression, something that had been held tight for 3 years. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, leather and sage and wood smoke and home. "I am so sorry," she sobbed against his shirt. "I am so sorry I left. I was scared and stupid and I did not understand what I had. I thought I needed something else, something more, but all I needed was you. All I have ever needed was you." Jake pulled back just enough to cup her face in his calloused hands. His eyes were wet, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. "I lit that lantern every night. Every single night I lit it and put it in the window, and I prayed you would see it and come home. I never stopped hoping. I never stopped loving you." "I love you," Sarah said, the words tumbling out desperately. "I have loved you every day I was gone. I tried to forget you, tried to move on, but I could not. You are in every beat of my heart, Jake Sullivan. You are my home." He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of salt and hope and 3 years of longing. Sarah kissed him back with everything in her, pouring all her regret and love and desperation into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, they were both shaking. "Come inside," Jake said softly. "Come home, Sarah." He took her hand and led her up the porch steps. Sarah noticed, as she crossed the threshold, a lantern sitting on a small table beside the door. The glass was clean, the wick trimmed, ready to be lit when darkness fell. Jake saw her looking at it. "I was going to light it in another hour," he said quietly, "just like always." "You do not have to light it anymore," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "I am home now. I am not going anywhere ever again." The inside of the house took her breath away. Jake had built it with care, with love. The main room had a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, windows that let in the golden evening light. There was a kitchen with a real iron stove, a bedroom visible through an open doorway, rugs on the wooden floors. This was not a bachelor's rough cabin. This was a home built for a family, built for her. "You did all this?" she asked, turning to look at him. "I built it for you," Jake said simply. "Every nail, every board. I built it thinking about you coming home. I wanted you to have something good to come back to, something that showed you I could provide for you, take care of you." Sarah felt fresh tears spill over. "Jake, I never doubted you could provide for me. I doubted myself. I thought I was not strong enough for this life, but I was wrong. I am strong enough. I am strong enough because I love you." They stood in the center of his home, their home, and held each other as the light faded outside. Jake told her about the past 3 years, about building up the ranch, about the cattle he had bought, about the two men he employed now, good men named Carl and Pete. He told her about the nights when the loneliness had been almost unbearable, when he had sat on the porch and stared at the road, hoping to see her coming back. He told her about the mornings when he woke up and had to convince himself to keep going, keep hoping. Sarah told him about St. Louis, about watching her mother die, about the endless gray days in the boarding house, about the moment she had read Martha's letter and known with absolute certainty that she had to come back. She told him about the fear that had gripped her during the entire journey west, the terror that she would arrive too late, that he would have given up on her. "I would never have given up," Jake said fiercely. "Not if I lived to be 100. You are the only woman I will ever love, Sarah Webb. The day you left, I thought my heart would stop beating. But it kept going, and I knew it was because you were out there somewhere, and someday you might come back to me." As full darkness fell, Jake did not light the lantern. Instead, he lit lamps inside the house, filling the rooms with warm light. He cooked dinner for them, beef steaks and potatoes and greens from a garden Sarah had not noticed behind the house. They ate at a sturdy wooden table, and with every bite, Sarah felt more grounded, more real, more home. After dinner, they sat on the porch together, Jake's arm around her shoulders, Sarah's head resting against his chest. The night was clear, and stars blazed overhead in their thousands. The valley was dark except for a few distant lights from neighboring ranches and the glow of redemption to the south. "I used to sit out here and imagine this exact moment," Jake said quietly. "You sitting beside me, my arm around you the whole night ahead of us. I have imagined it so many times I almost cannot believe it is real." "It is real," Sarah promised. "I am real. And I am never leaving you again, Jake. Never." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the starlight. "Marry me, Sarah, marry me tomorrow. I do not want to wait another day. I have waited 3 years. I want you to be my wife. I want to go to sleep every night with you beside me and wake up every morning knowing you are mine." "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you. Tomorrow, next week, whenever you want. I am yours, Jake. I have always been yours." They sat together until late into the night, making plans, talking about the future. Jake wanted children, a whole houseful of them. Sarah wanted to teach again, maybe start a school closer to the ranch for the children of the scattered homesteaders. They talked about expanding the herd, about building a bigger barn, about planting an orchard. They talked about all the ordinary, beautiful things that make up a life together. When they finally went inside, Jake showed Sarah to the bedroom. It was clear he had prepared it for this moment for her. The bed was large and covered with a beautiful quilt, the kind that took months to make. There were curtains on the windows, a rug on the floor, a dresser, and a wardrobe. "I will sleep out here on the sofa," Jake said, his voice formal. "Until we are married, I want to do this right, Sarah. I want to honor you." Sarah took his hand and looked up into his eyes. "You are a good man, Jake Sullivan, the best man I have ever known. Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for not giving up." He kissed her forehead, his lips gentle. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for following the light home." That night, Sarah slept in a real bed for the first time in weeks, and she slept deeply and peacefully, knowing that the man she loved was just in the next room, knowing that she was finally, truly home. When she woke in the morning, she could hear Jake moving around in the kitchen, and the smell of coffee and bacon filled the house. She dressed quickly and came out to find him cooking breakfast, his sleeves rolled up, a slight smile on his face. When he saw her, the smile widened into something brilliant and joyous. "Good morning, beautiful." "Good morning," Sarah said, moving to his side. He wrapped one arm around her waist and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that made her knees weak. They ate breakfast together, and then Jake rode into town to speak to Reverend Clark about a wedding. Sarah stayed at the ranch, exploring her new home, meeting the ranch hands Carl and Pete, who were both polite and welcoming. Carl was an older man, probably in his 40s, taciturn but with kind eyes. Pete was younger, maybe 25, friendly and talkative. "We are real glad you came back, Miss Sarah," Pete said, his hat in his hands. "Boss has been like a ghost these past years, working himself near to death, never smiling, just waiting. It is good to see him happy again." Sarah felt a pang of guilt, but also gratitude that Jake had such loyal men working for him. She spent the morning cleaning the house, though it barely needed it, and then went out to explore the property. The ranch was beautiful with good grazing land, a creek running through the northern pasture, views of the mountains in every direction. Jake had built something real here, something lasting. When Jake returned in the early afternoon, he was grinning. "Reverend Clark will marry us the day after tomorrow. He says he has been waiting years to perform this particular ceremony." "The whole town is talking about you being back, Sarah. Everyone wants to come to the wedding." "Then we will have a wedding the whole town can come to," Sarah said, feeling joy bubble up inside her. "We will have a celebration." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Martha came to the ranch and brought Sarah's things from storage, including the hope chest Sarah had left behind when she fled to St. Louis. Sarah was amazed to find that Jake had kept it safe all these years, stored in his barn, waiting for her return. Inside were linens she had embroidered, quilts she had sewn, all the things a young woman collected for her future home. Martha also brought fabric and helped Sarah sew a simple but beautiful wedding dress, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. They worked together in the warm spring sunshine on the porch, and it felt like old times, like the years apart had never happened. "He never stopped loving you," Martha said as she stitched a hem. "I watched him every time he came to town. He would look at the road leading south, and I knew he was hoping to see you coming back. David tried to set him up with women, nice women who would have been happy to marry him, but Jake was not interested. He said his heart was already taken." "I do not deserve him," Sarah whispered. "Maybe not," Martha said honestly. "But you love him, and that is what matters. You came back, Sarah. You chose him. That takes courage." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. A perfect spring day with a blue sky and a warm breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. Sarah dressed in her new gown with Martha's help, and Martha pinned wildflowers in her hair. When Sarah looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman radiant with happiness, her eyes bright, her cheeks flushed. The wedding was held in the little church in Redemption, and it seemed like the entire town had turned out. The pews were packed with ranchers and townspeople, all smiling, all happy to see this reunion. Jake stood at the front of the church with Reverend Clark, wearing a new suit that fit him perfectly. He looked handsome and nervous, and so full of love that Sarah felt tears sting her eyes as she walked down the aisle. There was no one to give her away, her parents both gone, but Martha walked beside her, and that felt right. When Sarah reached the front of the church, Jake took her hands in his, and his grip was warm and strong and sure. Reverend Clark spoke about love and faith and forgiveness. He spoke about the prodigal returning home, about lights in the darkness, about hope that never dies. And then he asked them to speak their vows. Jake went first, his voice steady and clear. "Sarah, I loved you from the moment I first saw you, and I never stopped loving you, not for one single day. When you left, I thought I might die from the pain of it. But I held on and I hoped, and I lit a lantern every night to guide you home. Now you are here, and I promise you that I will love you for the rest of my life. I will work hard to provide for you, protect you, make you happy. I will be the husband you deserve. I will be faithful and true until the day I die." Sarah's turn came, and she had to blink back tears to see him clearly. "Jake, I made a terrible mistake when I left you. I was young and scared, and I thought I needed something different. But every day I was gone, I missed you. You were in my dreams and in my heart, and I could not escape the truth that you are my home. When I heard about your lantern, I knew I had to come back. I had to tell you that I love you, that I have always loved you, that I will love you forever. I promise to be a good wife to you, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build a life and a family with you. I promise to never run away again. I am home now, and home is wherever you are. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Jake kissed her with such tenderness and joy that the whole congregation burst into applause. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, husband and wife, and Sarah felt like her heart would burst from happiness. The town put on a celebration in the street outside the church. There was music and dancing, tables laden with food, laughter, and joy. Jake and Sarah danced together and everyone cheered. Martha cried happy tears. David Cooper shook Jake's hand and told him he was a lucky man. Mrs. Henderson from the general store gave Sarah a beautiful set of dishes. Tom Baker from the livery gave them a milk cow. The whole community welcomed Sarah back and celebrated their union. As the sun began to set, Jake and Sarah rode back to the ranch together, alone at last. The valley was bathed in golden light, and everything looked impossibly beautiful. When they reached the house, Jake lifted Sarah down from her horse and carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, their home. Jake set Sarah down gently and cupped her face in his hands. I cannot believe you are really my wife. I cannot believe this is real. It is real, Sarah promised. We are real. Our life together starts now. They spent their wedding night wrapped in each other's arms, discovering each other, loving each other with a passion and tenderness that left them both breathless. Sarah had dreamed of this for 3 years, and the reality was even more beautiful than the dreams. Jake was gentle and patient and loving, and when Sarah fell asleep in his arms, she felt complete for the first time in her life. The days that followed were full of simple joys. Sarah settled into life on the ranch, learning the rhythms of the work, helping where she could. She cooked meals for Jake and the ranch hands, tended the garden, cleaned and organized the house. She rode out with Jake sometimes to check on the cattle, loving the feeling of the wind in her hair and the vast sky overhead. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, talking about their day, making plans. Jake wanted to buy more land to the east. Sarah wanted to start a small school in one of the unused outbuildings, teaching the children of the scattered homesteaders and ranchers. They talked about children of their own, and Sarah felt a thrill of anticipation every time the subject came up. Summer came, hot and golden, and the ranch prospered. The cattle were healthy, the grass was good, and Jake's careful management paid off with a successful drive to the railhead in August. He came back with money to expand the herd and buy the land he wanted. Sarah's little school started in September with 6 students, children aged 5 to 12 who rode in from neighboring ranches. She loved teaching again, loved seeing young minds open to knowledge and possibility. By October, Sarah was certain she was pregnant. She waited until she was sure, and then she told Jake one evening as they sat by the fire. His face transformed with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby. Sarah, you have made me the happiest man alive." Winter came, and Sarah's belly grew round. Jake was tender and attentive, making sure she did not work too hard, keeping the house warm, cooking for her when she felt too tired. They spent the long winter evenings planning for the baby, talking about names, preparing a cradle that Jake built with his own hands. On a cold March night in 1879, Sarah went into labor. Martha came to help, and after a long night, Sarah delivered a healthy baby boy. Jake held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect life they had created together. "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, exhausted but radiant. Daniel, Jake said softly. After your father, Daniel Sullivan. Sarah smiled through happy tears. Daniel Sullivan, it is perfect. Little Daniel was a good baby, healthy and strong. Jake was a devoted father, doting on his son, getting up in the night to walk with him when he cried. Sarah watched her husband with their baby and felt such overwhelming love that it almost hurt. This was the life she had nearly thrown away. This was the happiness she had almost lost forever. As Daniel grew from a baby to a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Jake bought the land to the east and expanded the herd. Sarah's school grew to 10 students, and she loved every moment of teaching. They became pillars of the community, hosting barn dances and church socials, helping neighbors when times were hard. When Daniel was 2 years old, Sarah became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the autumn of 1881 she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace, and she had Sarah's dark hair and Jake's gray eyes. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Jake and Sarah added onto the house, building more bedrooms. In 1883, they had another son, whom they named Thomas. In 1885, a second daughter arrived, and they named her Hope. 4 children filled the house with laughter and chaos and love. Sarah sometimes thought about the lantern, about the light that had guided her home. Jake had never lit it again after the night she came back. It sat on its shelf, a reminder of the years of waiting, of hope that had refused to die. Sometimes Sarah would pick it up and hold it, remembering the moment she had read Martha's letter, the moment she had decided to come home. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Jake surprised Sarah by taking her on a picnic to a spot overlooking the valley. The children were with Martha for the afternoon, and it was just the two of them, like it had been in the beginning. They spread a blanket on the grass and ate the food Sarah had packed, and then they lay together looking up at the blue sky. I have been thinking about that lantern, Jake said quietly. The one I lit for you all those years. What about it? Sarah asked, turning to look at him. I want to give it to Daniel when he is older. I want him to understand what it means to love someone so much that you never give up hope, that you keep a light burning no matter how long the darkness lasts. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. That is beautiful, Jake. He will treasure it. Jake propped himself up on one elbow and looked down at her, his eyes serious. You saved me, Sarah. When you came back, you saved my life. I was just existing before that, just going through the motions. But when I saw you standing in my yard, when I realized you had really come back, I started living again. You and our children are everything to me. You are my whole world. You saved me too, Sarah said softly. I was lost in St. Louis. I was withering away just like my mother did. But I followed your light home and I found my life again. I found my purpose and my joy. I found everything that matters. They kissed there on the hillside, with the valley spread out below them and the mountains rising in the distance. It was a kiss that held 10 years of love and partnership, of shared joys and weathered storms, of children raised and a life built together. As the years continued to pass, the Sullivan Ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. Jake's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to provide a good life for their children. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the cattle. Grace was spirited and clever, always asking questions. Thomas was gentle and kind with a gift for gentling horses. Hope was the baby, adored by everyone, full of laughter and mischief. Sarah continued to teach at her little school, and she took great pride in watching her students grow and learn. Some went on to high schools in larger towns. A few even went to college. She knew she was making a difference, giving children opportunities they might not otherwise have had. In 1889, Montana became a state, and redemption celebrated with a huge festival. The Sullivans rode into town as a family, Jake and Sarah proud parents of 4 healthy, happy children. They watched the parade and the speeches, and Sarah felt a deep sense of belonging. This was her home, her community, her life. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Daniel, now 10 years old, asked a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Papa, Mama, how did you two meet? You have never really told us the whole story." Jake and Sarah looked at each other, and Sarah smiled. "Well, it is quite a story, son. It is about love and mistakes and second chances." They told their children the story as they rode home in the golden evening light. They told them about falling in love when they were young, about Sarah leaving because she was scared, about the 3 years of separation. And they told them about the lantern, about the light Jake had kept burning every single night, waiting for Sarah to come home. "So Mama saw the light and came back?" Grace asked, her eyes wide. "I heard about the light," Sarah corrected gently. "My Aunt Martha wrote and told me that your papa was lighting a lantern every night waiting for me, and when I read that, I knew I had to come home. I knew I had made a terrible mistake leaving, and I had to try to make it right." "What if Papa had not wanted you anymore?" Thomas asked, always the worrier. "Then I would have accepted that," Sarah said honestly. "It would have broken my heart, but I would have understood. I heard him when I left. I had no right to expect forgiveness." "But I did forgive her," Jake said, his hand tightening on Sarah's. "The moment I saw her, I forgave her. Because when you really love someone, truly love them, forgiveness comes easy." The years of pain did not matter anymore. All that mattered was that she had come back, that we had a chance to build a life together. Little Hope, who was 4 years old, piped up from where she sat in front of Sarah on the saddle. "I am glad Mama came back, because otherwise we would not be here." Everyone laughed at that, and Jake reached over to ruffle Hope's hair. "That is exactly right, sweetheart, and we are all very glad you are here." When they reached the ranch house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. The lantern was visible through the window where it sat on its shelf, never lit again, but always present, a reminder of hope and perseverance and love that refused to die. That night, after the children were in bed, Jake and Sarah stood on the porch together, his arms around her, her head resting on his chest. The stars were coming out overhead, and the night was peaceful and perfect. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked quietly. "Giving up the city, living out here in the middle of nowhere, working so hard?" Sarah turned in his arms to look up at him, and her eyes were clear and certain. "Not for one single second. This is where I belong, Jake, with you, with our children on this land. I have everything I ever wanted. I have everything that matters." "I love you, Sarah Sullivan," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "I loved you when you were Sarah Webb. I loved you through 3 years of waiting, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Sarah whispered. "Thank you for lighting that lantern. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for giving me a second chance." "Thank you for following the light home," Jake said, and then he kissed her, a long, sweet kiss that held all the love and commitment of their years together. The years continued to unfold in their beautiful, ordinary way. The children grew and thrived. Daniel eventually took over much of the ranch work, learning from his father, becoming a skilled cattleman in his own right. Grace discovered a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of Montana in her art. Thomas became known throughout the valley as the best horse trainer for miles around. Hope, the youngest, grew into a bright, joyful young woman who wanted to be a teacher like her mother. Jake and Sarah grew older together, their faces lined with years of sun and wind and laughter. Their love deepened with time, becoming something solid and unshakable, the foundation of their family and their life. They faced hard times, years when the cattle prices dropped, winters that were brutally cold, summers of drought. But they faced everything together and they always came through. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Daniel was 21 now, courting a rancher's daughter from the next valley. Grace was 18, beautiful and talented. Thomas was 16, tall and strong. Hope was 14, full of dreams and plans. There were also grandchildren now, 2 babies from Daniel's recent marriage, filling the house with new life and laughter. At the celebration dinner, Jake stood to make a toast. He raised his glass and looked at Sarah, his eyes full of love. 20 years ago, I married the woman of my dreams. She had come back to me after 3 years away, following the light I had kept burning for her. I thought that day was the happiest of my life, but I was wrong. Every day with Sarah has been the happiest day of my life. Every morning I wake up beside her, every evening we sit together on the porch, every meal we share, every challenge we face together. She has given me 4 incredible children and now grandchildren. She has made my house a home and my life complete. Sarah, my darling wife, thank you for coming back. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for every day of these 20 years. Sarah was crying openly now, and everyone else at the table was misty-eyed. She stood and went to Jake, wrapping her arms around him. You are my home, Jake Sullivan. You always have been. I wasted 3 years trying to run from that truth, but I have spent the last 20 years living it. And I will spend every day I have left loving you and thanking God that you never gave up on me. They kissed to the sound of their children and grandchildren cheering, and it was a perfect moment, a perfect celebration of a love that had endured and grown and flourished. As Jake and Sarah grew older, they gradually handed over more of the ranch work to Daniel and Thomas, who now worked the land together. Jake and Sarah spent their days in quieter pursuits, Jake working with the horses he loved, Sarah teaching a new generation of children in her school. They took walks together in the evenings, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing, simply enjoying each other's presence. In 1905, when Jake was 52 and Sarah was 48, they celebrated their 30th anniversary. All 4 children were there, along with 6 grandchildren now, with another on the way. The ranch house rang with laughter and love, and Sarah looked around at the family they had built and felt overwhelming gratitude. That evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Jake took Sarah's hand and led her outside. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead. He led her to the barn, and when he opened the door, Sarah gasped. Inside, lit by dozens of candles, was the most beautiful buggy she had ever seen. It was painted a deep blue with elegant lines and comfortable seats, clearly custom-made. "Jake, what is this?" Sarah asked, amazed. "I had it made special," Jake said, looking pleased with himself. "I wanted to give you something to mark 30 years. This buggy is for us to take rides together, to explore the valley, to enjoy the land we have built our life on. We have worked so hard for so many years, Sarah. I want us to have time to simply enjoy being together." Sarah threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. "It is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much." They took their first ride in the new buggy the next day, driving through the valley they had called home for 3 decades. They passed landmarks that held memories. The spot where Jake had proposed the night she came back, the hill where they had picnicked on their 10th anniversary, the creek where they had taught their children to fish. Every place held a story, a moment in the life they had built together. "Do you remember the night you came back?" Jake asked as they drove. "The way you looked standing in my yard, holding the reins of that rented horse." "I was terrified," Sarah admitted. "I thought you might turn me away. I thought 3 years was too long, that I had destroyed what we had." "I could never have turned you away," Jake said. "The moment I saw you, I knew that every night of lighting that lantern had been worth it. Every moment of waiting, every moment of pain, it all became worth it because you came back. I think about that lantern sometimes, Sarah said softly. About how close I came to never seeing it, never knowing you were waiting. If Martha had not written to tell me, I might have stayed in St. Louis forever. I might have lived my whole life without this, without you, without our children and grandchildren. But she did write, and you did come back, Jake said firmly. That is what matters. We got our second chance, Sarah, and we made the most of it. We built a good life, raised good children, loved each other well. Not everyone gets that. We are blessed. We are blessed, Sarah agreed, leaning against his shoulder as the buggy rolled on through the golden afternoon light. The years continued their steady march forward. More grandchildren came, and then great-grandchildren. Jake and Sarah became the patriarch and matriarch of a large, loving family. Their children all settled within a day's ride of the home ranch, building their own lives while staying connected to their roots. In 1912, Jake fell ill with pneumonia. For a week, Sarah sat beside his bed holding his hand, praying desperately that he would recover. He did, slowly regaining his strength, but the illness left him frailer than before. He was 59 years old, and for the first time, he looked his age and more. Sarah nursed him back to health with fierce determination. She would not lose him, not after everything they had been through, not after the life they had built together. And Jake fought to recover because he could not bear to leave her. Slowly, day by day, he grew stronger until he could walk again, work a little in the barn again, sit on the porch with Sarah in the evenings again. "You are not allowed to leave me," Sarah told him one evening as they watched the sunset. "I did not follow your light home just to lose you now." Jake smiled and kissed her forehead. "I am not going anywhere, my love. I plan to sit on this porch with you for many more years. We have grandchildren to watch grow up, great-grandchildren to meet. Our story is not over yet." And it was not. Jake recovered his health, and though he was never quite as strong as before, he was still very much himself. He still laughed, still loved, still found joy in every day. He and Sarah continued their rides in the blue buggy, continued their evening talks on the porch, continued their life together. In 1918, the world was engulfed in war, and even Montana felt the effects. Daniel's oldest son enlisted and went to Europe. The family lived in fear until he came home safe in 1919, changed by what he had seen but alive and whole. The experience reminded them all of how precious life was, how important it was to hold tight to the people you loved. Jake and Sarah celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1928. Jake was now 75, Sarah 71. They were old now, their hair white, their movements slow. But their love was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger, tempered by 4 decades of shared life. The family gathered at the home ranch for a huge celebration. There were children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, more than Sarah could easily count. They ate and laughed and told stories, and Jake and Sarah sat at the head of the table, holding hands, watching their family with deep contentment. "Grandpa, tell us about the lantern," one of the great-grandchildren asked. The story had become a family legend, told and retold, a reminder of the power of hope and love. Jake smiled and looked at Sarah. "Should I tell it, or do you want to?" "You tell it," Sarah said. "You tell it the way you remember those years, lighting that lantern every night." So Jake told the story one more time. He told about meeting Sarah when she was just 17, about falling in love with her, about planning a future together. He told about her leaving, about the pain that had nearly destroyed him. And he told about the lantern, about making the decision to light it every single night, a beacon of hope and love that Sarah would somehow see and follow home. And did she see it, Grandpa? The child asked, eyes wide. "Not with her own eyes," Jake said, "but she heard about it and she understood what it meant. It meant I was waiting, it meant I had not given up." It meant there was a place for her here, a home, a love that would never die. And she was brave enough to come back to face me after 3 years to ask for a second chance. That took more courage than anything I did. And you forgave her right away? Another grandchild asked. The instant I saw her, Jake confirmed, all the pain of those years just vanished. She was home, and that was all that mattered. Sarah squeezed his hand, tears running down her weathered cheeks. Best decision I ever made coming back. This life, this family, this love, it is all because I followed the light home. The celebration continued into the evening with music and dancing and joy. Jake and Sarah danced together, their movements slow but full of grace and love. Everyone watched them and saw what real love looked like, love that had lasted 40 years and would last until death parted them. As the evening wound down and families began to head home, Jake and Sarah stood on the porch, waving goodbye. When everyone was gone and the house was quiet, they sat together in their favorite spot, wrapped in blankets against the cool evening air. 40 years, Sarah marveled. Where did the time go? Into living, Jake said simply. Into raising children, building this ranch, loving each other. It went into a life well lived. Do you have any regrets? Sarah asked, a question she had asked before over the years. Only those 3 years without you, Jake said, as he always did, but even those years had meaning. They taught me what really mattered. They taught me that love is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, so maybe I do not even regret those years. Maybe they were necessary to make us appreciate what we have. I regret them, Sarah said. I regret every day I was away from you, but I am grateful for every day since I came back. 40 years of happiness, Jake, 40 years of love. Not many people get that. We are blessed, Jake said, as he had said so many times before, and it was true. They were blessed beyond measure. The years grew shorter as Jake and Sarah entered their 80s. They moved slower now, their bodies betraying them in small ways, but their minds were still sharp and their love was undimmed. They still took rides in the blue buggy, though not as far. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sun set over the valley. They still held hands and shared kisses and told each other, "I love you," every single day. In the spring of 1933, as the world struggled through economic depression, as drought and dust threatened farms and ranches across the West, Jake and Sarah celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary. It was a quieter celebration this time, just close family, but it was no less joyful. They were 80 and 83 years old, and they had lived a full, rich life together. That evening, as they sat on the porch, Jake took Sarah's hand. "I have been thinking about that lantern again." "What about it?" Sarah asked, though she thought she knew. "It is still on the shelf in the living room. I want to light it one more time. Tonight. I want to remember that night when hope became reality, when you came home to me." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, let us light it together." They went inside, and Jake took the lantern down from its shelf. It had not been lit in 55 years, but Jake had kept it clean and maintained, the wick trimmed, ready. He lit a match, and together they watched the flame catch, watched the lantern glow with warm, golden light. They carried it out to the porch and set it on the railing where Jake had set it so many nights all those years ago. They stood together, arms around each other, and looked at the light shining out into the darkness. "I followed that light home," Sarah whispered, "and it led me to everything I ever wanted." "And I kept that light burning," Jake said, "because I could not give up hope. And my hope was rewarded beyond anything I could have imagined." They stood there for a long time, watching the lantern burn, remembering the past, grateful for the present. When they finally went inside, Jake left the lantern burning on the porch, just like he used to do all those years ago. When they woke the next morning, the lantern had burned out, its fuel exhausted. But it had served its purpose one last time, a reminder of hope and love and second chances. Jake put it back on its shelf, and there it would stay, a family heirloom, a symbol of the love story that had created a family and a legacy. Jake Sullivan passed away peacefully in his sleep in the autumn of 1935. He was 82 years old, and he died with Sarah's hand in his, in the house he had built for her, surrounded by the family they had created together. His last words were, "I love you, Sarah. Thank you for coming home." Sarah lived another 5 years, staying in the home they had shared, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her dearly. She spent her days telling stories about Jake, about their life together, making sure everyone understood the depth of love that had sustained them through 57 years of marriage. On a quiet spring evening in 1940, Sarah passed away in her sleep. She was 83 years old, the same age Jake had been when he died. Her family found her in bed, peaceful and serene, a smile on her face. On her bedside table was a letter she had written, addressed to her family. The letter read, "My dearest children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, if you are reading this, I have gone to join my beloved Jake. Do not mourn for me. I have lived a life full of love and joy and purpose. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I was given a second chance and I did not waste it. I followed the light home, and that light led me to the most beautiful life I could have imagined. Remember our story. Remember that love is worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth everything. Hold tight to the people you love, build lives of meaning and purpose, and never ever give up hope. With all my love, Sarah." They buried Sarah next to Jake on a hillside overlooking the valley, the same hillside where they had picnicked on their 10th anniversary. The whole community came to the funeral, generations of people whose lives had been touched by this couple and their enduring love. On Sarah's grave, Daniel placed the lantern, the one his father had lit every night for 3 years, the one that had guided his mother home. It sat there as a marker, a memorial, a reminder of a love that had conquered time and distance and doubt. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the valley, some people swore they could see a light on that hillside, a warm golden glow that looked just like a lantern burning. It was probably just a trick of the light, a reflection of the setting sun. But the family liked to think it was Jake and Sarah, their love burning eternal, a light that would never go out, guiding others home to the people they loved, just as Sarah had been guided home so many years before. The story of the cowboy who lit a lantern and the woman who followed it home became a legend in Montana, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of hope, the strength of love, and the beauty of second chances. And the lantern itself remained in the family, cared for and treasured, a reminder that some lights never truly go out, that some love lasts forever, and that home is not a place but a person, a heart that beats in rhythm with your own, a light in the darkness that guides you home.